Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one actually based on one of your past suggestions. This was from one that was just straight up 1 year or so ago, back in January 2019. It goes to show that if I don't select your video just then, there's a good chance that I'll recheck some of the older suggestions later on, and then you'll be able to see yours posted here. The reason why I picked this one is one of the main reasons why I continue to do these videos, because when I was reading this information, it is so amazing, so fascinating to hear about this encounter, something I never heard of before. But once I've read all the info here, I just definitely had to share it. It has a whole set of unique circumstances to it, and you'll hear more in a minute why. I just definitely had to pick this one for this video series. But you're looking at it now, doesn't really go by any specific name. Instead, it's more as an occurrence, but it's known as the Potosi Sheepslayer Encounter. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info tied with this incident, and then that way you'll be able to see exactly why it fits perfectly in this series. So what was this Potosi Sheepslayer Encounter? Well, it was something that occurred back in Potosi, Bolivia, hence the name of the actual encounter here, there in early 1968. So you have to go back just a couple of years or so to be able to know when this occurred. Unfortunately, there's not too much specifics in terms of the exact date or the location there within Potosi, but at least when you're looking at some of the pictures I found here of Potosi back in the 1960s, you can see that even back then, actually even today, looking at some of the current pictures, it's a city or village that's built within a centralized area, but there's a lot of open land surrounding it. So imagine this back in 1968, there were probably even less homes back in that village, and then out there in the land, it would have just been stark midnight, stark darkness when it comes to being able to see things out there. The reason I mention this is because the way this encounter occurred, it occurred under the cover of night, and so that puts into place what happened later on when it comes to the limited info on the description of this alien. But yes, there in early 1968 in Potosi, Bolivia, there was a woman by the name of Valentina Flores. She was both a llama and a sheep herder who at that night was bringing in her livestock to make sure that they were safe. I imagine she was corralling them after they were grazing throughout the day, and then that way she would put them into some kind of enclosure to ensure that they were safe from any of the other wildlife out there in the night. But as she did so, as she went over to one of her pens, that's when she noticed something else. Even under the cover of night, which again, there in Potosi, Bolivia, you could imagine that there's no lamp lights, there's no street lights, there's nothing else pretty much other than the stark darkness of the night highlighted by the moonlight. But even under then, she noticed what she could describe as a net covering one of the pins. And so when she curiously, went over to that location to figure out why is there a net right there above one of those pins, that's when she saw this. Unfortunately, there's not too much description as to how this alien looked like because of those darkness surrounding the environment, and also because of the limited brief interaction she had with it. So interpretations of how it looked like just vary, but we could imagine that it being, if it's like a usual alien encounter, something short statured, something that had some kind of coverings on it, probably metallic or some other type of suit-like device. And in this case, it seemed to have some kind of helmet as well that was covering its facial features. Otherwise, there's a good chance that this lady Valentina would have been able to describe its face. But either way, though, she saw it there, but most importantly, she saw what it was doing to her sheep. Apparently, this little guy, whoever he was hovering over, not hovering, but actually standing over or kneeling over one of the sheeps, and it was disemboweling it. I would imagine, of course, that it had been killed at that point, but there it was, taking out some of the guts and then apparently putting it into some kind of bag. If you could call it like some kind of rucksack or some other type of bag that goes on its back, that's essentially what it was. And so this organ, whatever it had within the sheep, it did so many times, in fact, that later on it was discovered that it did it 34 times with 34 4 other sheep. So this entire herd was killed by whoever this little alien was, and it was taking all these organs, or specific organs, and then putting it into that back that it had there. And so she didn't know this, of course, at first because of the darkness of the night. Instead, she thought it was a robber, someone that was there maybe trying to steal something associated with her land or her livestock there. And so she grabbed some rocks and started throwing at it. That's when it caught the attention of this little alien, and then that's when it went to a radio-like device. Whatever this device was that was nearby it clicked a button on there, and then the entire net that was surrounding the pen, which presumably was there to ensure that it could do so, whatever it was doing to the sheep, unabated. It wanted to make sure that it could do so privately without having anything else interfere with it. Well, all of a sudden, this net retracted. It just instantly went from being wide open, covering the entire area of the pen, to now suddenly going into this tiny little radio-like device. And when it did so, then that's when it all went into that device for the alien, and then it put it back into its rucksack. But the next thing it did was outright dangerous. So briefly, very briefly, Valentina saw that the way that this alien was disemboweling the sheep was through some device, something that she called an unusual hooked instrument. And so whatever it was using, it was definitely working well, considering the number of animals later on that were discovered that were cut open by this device. Well, this alien, alarmed now at the fact that she was throwing rocks at it, took this device and then actually threw it at her, and it struck Valentina, apparently causing some kind of slight wound. I don't know if it was something that hit her head or her arm or her leg or something else, because that wasn't really described within the story, but at least it caused her to stop when it came to throwing those rocks. And then curiously enough, this device, as sharp as it was and the way it was thrown, it came back to this little alien guy as a boomerang. So definitely something that was either called back, either electronically, magnetically, or who knows, some other type of alien technology that caused it to come back, or just the simple laws of physics when it comes to something coming back towards it if it's thrown in the right angle. But either way, though, this thing, whatever this device was, it did its work. And so Valentina stopped, frightened. She went away just a little bit, and then at least just enough pause to allow the alien to do what it did next. It caught that boomerang back in its arm, and then that's when it went back to its rucksack. And then that was it pretty much, because the next thing that happened was very, very quick. Whatever this rucksack was made out of, it was apparently the creature's own transportation device, because at that point, 2 tiny pairs of legs went out of the rucksack and went straight into the ground. And then it used either something within the legs itself or within the technology of the rucksack to be able to fly straight into the air. And so when that happened, that was pretty much it. That was the last thing she saw of this Potosi Sheepslayer. And then there it was, descending into the sky, into the darkness, and that was the last scene of it. But all in all, whoever this short humanoid-like figure was in terms of this alien, it was there in her yard, or in her area, in her pen, for these sheep and for these llamas. And then there it was, collecting, who knows, specifically the organs for it, and why it did so, but there it was doing so. And then when that happened, then it was putting it into the backpack, and then it flew off after it became alarmed at her trying to defend whatever was occurring there in her location. But otherwise, no other encounters have happened in terms of this Potosi Sheepslayer. Other areas there in Potosi apparently have not described any other people living there or villagers running into this humanoid alien. At first, one could think, like when I was reading it myself, okay, maybe it is someone in a costume of sorts that is pretending to do something else and is truly like robbing something associated with these animals, and then that's where it falls more along the lines of it being a human. But the fact later on that this thing, whatever it had on its back, this rucksack, extended those legs and then flew off into the air, there in Potosi, Bolivia, there in the 1960s, that's not going to happen anytime soon, like in terms of reality. So definitely goes into more of the extraterrestrial as to what occurred with this encounter with Valentina Flores. I couldn't find any more information about her or whether she gave interviews or whether she gave other experiences after what occurred. But otherwise, at least in this case, that's the encounter known as the Potosi Sheepslayer. But if anyone has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. Anyone there from that area there in Potosi? It looked like it's a tiny village. So even though it's a location that only has a small amount of people living there, I'm bound to see and hear if there's anybody that happens to know locations, or anyone that has family members or other people that lived there in the past that would know more about this. I imagine, considering too how tiny that village is, the word of this encounter would have spread very quickly, and there would have no doubt been a good amount of people trying to go there to see what occurred, especially seeing all these livestock, in this case these 34 sheep all slayed, that the word of that encounter would have spread quickly. So I'm hoping that if anyone has any more updated comments about it on a more personal level, then that would definitely be great to share here. So, but yes, indeed, thank you as always, everyone, for your continued suggestions. I'll check some of the other past ones too. And thank you as always. Take care. Bye.